So should we, we'll get started. All right.
How about Ellie? We'll let Ellie go first.
Okay. Well, I'm in Colorado right now, but I'm based in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm an animator. I got my BFA at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and I like to make work about mental health and body image, mostly autobiographical. Awesome, thank you. Why don't we have Vanessa introduce yourself next?
I'm adjusting my screen. Hi, no, it's okay. I'm Vanessa Sweet. I also go by Vee. I consider myself a multidisciplinary artist, but I'm an animation filmmaker and illustrator. Most of my work often touches on like social justice and advocacy themes around that, such as environmentalism, sustainability, and humanitarian issues. I would say that I'm trying to think. I'm going to read from my little blurb, if that's okay, because I'm really awful about talking about myself. So good job having me on. But so in 2017, I was awarded a Rasmussen Foundation Individual Artist Award that actually aided in my completion of this film and helped me to get it out to the world. So thank you for seeing it and for inviting me to screen here. It's since gone on to outside of Breckenridge to screen in over 45 festivals, and it's won 8 awards. I live in Rochester, New York, and I'm from Pennsylvania. So I see you, Kelly. I used to live in Philly. And so right now I live in Rochester, and I'm actually an assistant professor of 2D animation at RIT, the Rochester Institute of Technology.
So great, thanks. Kelly, do you want to go next?
Sure, I'll go next. I'm actually going to read from my bio too, because I just feel like
that helped me a lot.
Much more impressive because I'm not great at talking about myself either. But I am in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but I'm from Maryland, DC area. And it's weird because I wrote it in third person, so I'll still read it in that way. So Kelli Williams is an animator, visual artist, and community artist based in Philadelphia, where she is an assistant professor at Moore College of Art and Design. In her personal work, she uses stop motion animation, photography, installation, and humor to create work that comments on society through the lens of social media and technology. Her work has been shown nationally and internationally and has been featured in the Huffington Post, Columbus Live, Hyper, Allergic, ArtNet, Baltimore magazines, and Netflix Cops and Robbers. So that was all weird talking about yourself like that, but that's me. Yeah, and my work was the This Is True episodes in the lineup.
Yeah, so we actually have, it sounds like several of you are teachers as well as artists, which is really neat to see that through line. Yeah. Camila, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Camila. I'm a Brazilian animator, director, and screenwriter. I'm now doing a master's course here in Genk, Belgium. I just moved here like a week ago. And my film is, my first film is called Carne, which is selected on the Breck Film Festival. And I like to experiment with animation and explore the sensoriality of the materials in my films. And I've also created and organized a small festival in Brazil, which is called Lesma. It's an animation festival. I studied media studies as my bachelor's, and I did 1 year in film and television production in the UK. And Lizzie Hobbs, an independent animator, was one of my tutors. And I was very inspired by her. And yeah, that's it. Now I'm doing this animation masters here it's a joint masters. I will begin in Belgium, then I'm going to Finland, and it will end in Portugal. I'm very excited.
You did some work with some students too that you've shown me.
Yeah.
really fantastic work, yeah.
Thank you, Howard. Yeah, I usually work with students in animation workshops, but I also teach 5th grade students animation. Yeah. I'm really fond of the education part.
Awesome. Kate, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I am not going to read from my bio because I don't have it near me, so I'll try and remember who I am. So just from my head. So my name is Kate Jessop. I'm an animation filmmaker based now in Brighton via London and Manchester. I work with comedy as cultural commentary, and I like to explore lots of feminist and queer themes. I have written a comedy series called Tales from Pussy Willow, which was selected for the Berlinale Talent Lab. I am a mixed media animation filmmaker, so I like to work with lots of collage animation, so live action, stop motion and drawing. I've done quite a few artist residencies in Berlin, Reykjavik, Istanbul, and I'm also a senior lecturer in animation at the University of Brighton. The end.
Thank you. It's wonderful. So we've got a really fantastic panel of amazing women here. It's really Howard, my father, actually is our token man here on the panel, which is kind of fun. And yeah, just thank you so much for each of you for being so generous with your time and agreeing to come and talk to us. This is really exciting stuff. So really, I mean, we wanted to bring all of you together on this panel. And again, it sounds like each of you have, know each other a little bit already and have been on panels together, which is amazing. But we wanted to bring you together because your work has similar through lines in its approach to gender and sexuality and personal storytelling in a lot of ways as well, it seems like. And I think what's remarkable, and the place that I really wanted to start, is that given these similarities in thematic subject matter, each of your work is absolutely unique and idiosyncratic and very different formally and aesthetically. And I think that everyone who's able to see these films together in the Recentering the Margins package here at the festival will get a chance to see how really each of you has a just extremely original and unique approach to the medium of animation and to storytelling as well. So I guess I'll just start with one question, if that's okay with you. Take the lead here. So I think historically, the voices that have been the loudest in animation have been those of white men, right? Especially when we think about popular culture in the American context. I know that we've got a very diverse international group of filmmakers here, but I think that often when the general public thinks about animation, it's, The Simpsons or Family Guy or South Park and so on. And that a lot of these shows sort of pride themselves on an edgy kind of humor. But I wanted to say that I think, and what really drew me to each of your works is that, I think some of the most subversive and interesting and taboo breaking work is actually being done outside of that realm of sort of mainstream popular animation. And a lot of it is being done by women and by people in the LGBTQ community and by animators of color as well, people whose voices maybe haven't always had the platform that we're starting to see. And so I'd like you each to speak a bit about why the medium of animation specifically spoke to you as artists, and what it is about animation that you feel enables a sharing of
alternative perspectives and personal stories, and the kind of stories that we aren't seeing necessarily yet on mainstream television. If anyone would like to start, then
I'll start. I guess I came to animation through fine art. So yeah, the combination of fine art and the moving image was really exciting to me. But also just the ability to make a film alone was really appealing. I'm very introverted, and yeah, being able to construct something in that intimate setting was really freeing to me. So
thank you. Yeah, does someone else want to jump in with this or respond to Ellie's comment?
Yeah, so I also came to animation through technically photography. And what really drew me to animation was actually the craft of animation. I was a person who was kind of like, I like photography and I like ceramics and I like stage design, and then I like interior design and architecture because you make small things. And then I discovered stop motion. I'm like, oh my God, it's all of them. Like I wanted to be there. I also was into fashion. So that's one thing that really brought me to, I also really like to tell stories. So that was also one thing that I thought about. But one thing that, I'm an animator, but I also feel like I don't fit into the animation realm. A lot of the people that I'm inspired by would definitely be like live action sketch comedy writers like Key and Peele and, Dave Chappelle. And I feel like that's the vein I fit into a little bit more. But I also wonder, like, did I not see myself fitting in because it wasn't that much representation? Or is it that I always wonder that and I question that. And now I think I'm finding myself into the animation realm a little bit more now, because I feel like I'm like really now, I don't know, maybe it's just a personal journey that I am going through. But I also like Family Guy. I like cartoons. Like that's a part of, the entertainment I watch, but I never really saw myself doing that. But I don't know, that was my kind of into it. And then I kind of aligned myself with that kind of storytelling. And then of course, I started to get into the realm of short films and seeing people's work on Vimeo. And that's when I really found like, oh, there's people doing work. Like I think I looked through almost everybody's work on this panel after the first. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. I was on Kay's like Instagram, and it was, so I feel like that's where I align more than even mainstream. But I think there's now a place that could be mainstream for the type of work we do, but
Yeah, and I was actually hoping that we would kind of get to that point, because I think that, historically, maybe that there's been sort of a one point of view in animation, but the work that each of you is doing and the platform that, film festivals are giving you, and that, various, awards and funding bodies, and it's really fun to see the industry kind of putting their money where their mouth is in terms of supporting artists who have alternative stories to tell. Do you find that you are getting the support that you want and or need? I'm sure there's never enough money, but are you finding support in the industry, or do you think we have a long way to go still?
I think
is that to everyone, or
yeah,
yeah, to everyone. Yeah, sorry.
No, I don't think that I am getting the support that I need. So in regards to UK, the only funder really is BFI, and they always reject me because I think that I'm a little bit too controversial for them. So interestingly, it's always Germany and Canada that seem to support me quite a lot. In terms of UK, they don't seem to appreciate a lot of the kind of queer animation that I put out. But in regards to your first question that you just put forward, I'd just like to point out that a lot of the traditional animation in regards to European animation came from Soviet Union, and a lot of the former Eastern Bloc used to use animation as a form of protest. Yeah. So a lot of the original sort of like Jan Svankmajer from the former can't say the word, Czechoslovakia, and like Russia and Poland. So a lot of the previous kind of Eastern Bloc Soviet Union countries would very subtly use animation, like very intelligently, as a form of protest. And I actually find them to be very inspiring. In regards to contemporary culture, I actually do find the references that you had in regards to Family Guy and Simpsons, I actually like really enjoy them. But I can appreciate mainstream animation as well as more kind of like alternative animation. But the main point I wanted to say to you is, I think, and this kind of echoes the conversation I had with Howard last week, I think animation is the perfect medium in so many ways. One being the fact that you can get away with so much more than you could with live action. I think with animation, it gives you more of a license to kind of be more risk taking. So I think I used the example with Howard in regards to like BoJack Horseman, some of the issue, and that's a mainstream show on Netflix, which is a mainstream platform. The kind of issues that they explore in regards to addiction and the cultural commentary that it has on American gun culture, for example, I don't think that you would be able to do if it was live action. And a lot of the kind of cultural commentary that I address as well, I don't think that I would be able to get away with, not that I do particularly, if it was live action. I think with animation, it gives you almost like a sort of buffer in regards to making it a little bit more, I don't know, palatable perhaps. So in that regard, I think that animation is a very important medium actually for marginalized voices.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and when I sort of started with Family Guy and all of that, I want to kind of note that I'm not drawing a distinct line between, you know, the work that each of you do and that work, or, you know, obviously there's a continuum, and but I think that maybe is where a lot of American audiences go first when they think of animation, right?
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, that's better than Disney.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Yeah. Kate, I really liked what you had to say about animation being able to make certain topics sort of more quote unquote palatable, or maybe easier to digest, if we're going with the food metaphors here, you know, and I do, it's interesting to me that often really powerful films that are dealing with violence or with trauma or with you know, sexuality or you know, body issues, that at least in my experience as a film historian, I'm finding more interesting work being done around those difficult topics in animation than in live action. And so it does seem to me that maybe there is something in the medium that that enables you as artists to explore these more challenging topics. Could each of you maybe speak a bit to that? I know not all of you work in sort of the realm of trauma or of, you know, Kelli, for example, I know you work very much with humor, but I wonder too if there's something inherent to animation that makes exploring these kinds of topics more accessible, or yeah.
Well, I think I would just say that both Ellie and Camila are, you know, your work, and especially the work that's in this festival, really speaks to that, right? I mean, that's what you're exploring.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the abstraction that animation provides, and the distance and the lack of specificity makes it a lot easier to talk about really intimate personal things. I know that, like, I would never have made a film about my naked body in live action. It's just not something I would be comfortable with, but in animation I could get into it, and yeah, and I think it also makes it easier for people to watch it.
Yeah, this was a big challenge for me, like making Carne with my friends, because in Carne we have like 5 chapters and each one was animated by a different animator. But we were always very careful how to represent the real women stories. And I think if you were trying to tell a story with a non-violent vibe, I don't know, animation is a really great tool. You can use associations, metaphors, and sometimes it's difficult to, I don't know, we are so used to see violence everywhere. And I remember it was a challenge to us to not sexualize their bodies somehow. And we were always talking about.
Well, thank you, and apologies again. Camila, you were in the middle of a beautiful answer about working with your friends whose stories you were telling in your film, Carne, and the work that you wanted to do to make sure that their stories were not sexualized, or that there was no kind of violence done to sort of their bodies or their stories. And yeah, would you like to kind of pick up there?
Yeah. And another thing I think it's worth saying is, for example, in my film, in the very beginning, it was supposed to be made in 2D digital, but during the documentary process, and when we were interviewing the women, it changed completely. So when I interviewed the first protagonist, she said she was telling her story about her mother, who was a nutritionist. She was a fat child, and all the restrictions she had concerning food. So from that point, I decided to experiment with stop motion using real food and oil paint. And we tried to do the same with the other chapters in the film. So trying to associate each story with a technique and also in a sensorial way. And I think animation works pretty well with this, with sensations, and we are talking about bodies and our own experience. And I think it's easier to connect with the stories like this when you almost feel what's happening on screen.
Yeah, there's a very embodied feeling, and I mean, I guess that in both more ways than one, right? Embodied in the sense that each story is dealing with the physical body, and Ellie as well, and Vanessa. I think each of you in your films also kind of, in some, Vanessa with the idea of motherhood and literally and figuratively carrying your child, but this embodied idea. And I think each of your films does an excellent job of conveying those kind of visceral sensations in your work, right? I think watching them, we as viewers, at least, I mean, for me personally, I can't speak for everyone, but I think there are sensations that we're getting too, that we're kind of, and that enables a certain kind of empathy and connection that I think is unique to animation as a medium. I don't know if there's not really a question there, but
well, I think that's similar to in Vee's work too, right? And that was in Wild Woman especially. That's a kind of feeling that we get with the intimacy of the watercolor work that you use, the storyline. Are you hearing us okay, Vee?
Yeah, you're a little low, Howard, but I can hear you.
Great.
Well, and also the cycles, Vee, in your work, that the voiceover is kind of repeated. We have this cycle that can be connected, I think, to the cycle of a woman's body, right? And so you play with that in a really interesting way, visually, but also verbally, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna, this is probably from a bit earlier, but I was just thinking about, you had asked us about support, and you had asked us about animation as a medium, right? And I definitely agree in that. I think that not to take us backwards in the conversation, but
No, please. Yeah.
Sorry, my kiddo just came home. Hold on. Now I have chaos at my house at exactly the moment that I don't need chaos. But here you go, honey. There you go. So once you become a mom, it's always there. Hello. Thank you. Yes. Here's the eldest who actually inspired the film. You say hi. She just came home from school. You don't have a face because your mask's on. So yeah, animation as a medium is, I think it's really important that actually we recognize the fact that it is shifting, and so much of what was digested or previously digested or how we digest media has changed a bit. Hello. Has changed a bit from, even when I grew up, what we saw was what was put on TV, right? And that's still, in generally in America, that's still how majority of audiences do see things. But we have the advent of the internet, right? And how that's actually helping us to deliver more diverse narratives and to get that out there. And I think that has to be recognized, because it's both, an aid and sort of a hobble in a way, because there's still, how is the voice going to be edited from now, and how is it already being edited now? But in that sense, I do think, and Kelly, you mentioned that you were on Cops and Robbers. And so when we are sort of putting the pressure on, whether it's from protests or from what we're saying in our films, to start to hold those larger corporations accountable and start, saying, hey, actually, there's a lot more narrative to this narrative, that it's important. And so that's kind of the soapbox I wanted to stand on for a minute.
Well, it's an issue of censorship, right? I mean,
yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's a quiet censorship. It's kind of pervasive, but it's there.
And Kate,
but hopefully
that's what you were referring to, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if Kate's with us.
Kate's right here.
Kate's
okay.
here.
Oh.
What was the question?
I was just saying that kind of censorship is
Okay.
something that
Wonderful.
you were alluding to earlier in terms of just your work in BFI and trying to get Pussy Willow shown, right? Yeah.
I think that there is not. So unfortunately, I think that the UK is going on a trajectory. Sorry, I do appreciate that I'm in an American film festival right now, more on the American trajectory than the European trajectory post-Brexit. So European animation is more likely. So there is more capital, more funds in Europe to fund alternative voices than there is in the UK, because we are starting to follow a more of a capitalist model, following from America. You probably don't realize, because you live in America and you've lived in America all your life, but it's very capitalist, your culture, and we are starting to follow you. And what that means is there's no risk-taking work that is being funded right now. If I just flag off some European animators, again, sorry, I know we talked about this, Howard, last week, but in regards to the names have gone. The director of Pussy, Renata. And then, for example, the director of Reki, Martina. So all of these kind of directors that traditionally would be supported in Europe, the UK. So I think I would probably be aligned with this realm of directors. The UK will no longer support, because it doesn't see as being a more financial investment. So they want to see a return on their investment. So my work, they don't see a return on their investment. So I am not in line with this capitalist model.
No.
Right. I mean, the kind of work that I think each of you really are making does challenge a lot of these kind of societal norms and political systems, and because you are doing, I think, the very brave work of challenging some of these things, it doesn't necessarily it's not going to make money for that system that you're challenging, right? And so I wonder if you're finding that there are these alternative routes through, I mean, Vee, you mentioned the internet, the advent of the internet and how that changed things. And I mean, I wonder, I think as a scholar, as scholars, we kind of idealize, the democratization that the internet brought, and more people can have their work seen, and more people can make the kind of work that they want to make outside of these sort of mainstream money-making systems. Do you find that that's the case? Do you think that social media or various video hosting platforms, things like that, do you find that that is helping you to get your work out there as artists presenting these sort of alternative ideas? Or do you think we need more? I mean, I guess this is an enormous question of how do we support artists who are making challenging work, right? But I'm curious, as artists, what your experience has been in terms of sharing your work, getting eyeballs on your work,
No, go ahead, Camila.
Okay. In my opinion, I don't know. I think that the internet and the platforms are really nice, but it's really difficult to get people to watch your work if you are not very well known. In my case, for example, in Brazil, and when we were making Carne, we got some finance from the city council in São Paulo, which is called SPCine, but it was a pretty low budget, and afterwards we needed more funding, and we got a co-production with a Spanish producer. Also because Bolsonaro was elected, unfortunately, and now we have nothing. Like our national funds, they are gone. So in my case, I don't have a way to make my own short films in Brazil. It's we still have some funding, but they're so few and very, very competitive. So it's a pity. And even though I don't know, there has been some censorship. So, for example, my next film, there are some polemic themes on it, and it might be too much for them.
Yeah, and it's interesting because animation is such an expensive art form, right? It takes a lot of labor, and it takes a lot of money to make. And I think that correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the work that each of you do has a very kind of handmade feeling, and you're experimenting with different mediums. And I wonder if part of that is a funding thing, or if that is, if you were drawn to these sort of different mediums in terms of your style for other reasons.
Can I address your last question really quickly?
Please. Yeah, I'm sorry for just kind of moving on.
That's also a good question. But I think it's a really interesting moment in at least American animation, where looking like you care about the issues is like big business. So, I mean, I think, I've worked on the Cops and Robbers animation that is on Netflix now, but originally that we all donated our time, and we created this film before Netflix was even a part of it. And I think I noticed that there's a push for stories about things like police brutality or things about, marginalized communities when there's a push from the consumer, because this is still a part of the, whole money is all tied to money, capitalism, has been telling that people need to comment on this. They need to look like they care. So, I'm not saying that the people at Netflix didn't really care about the moment and the uprisings with George Floyd, but it was big business now to be a part of that conversation. So, and I noticed as a Black women animator that I've gotten more commissions during this time than ever. I've gotten more, requests to be on panels now than ever, because people are like, we need these voices, because it's no longer okay to look like you don't care about these issues.
There's a sort of performative allyship, right?
Yeah.
It's very performative. Yeah.
Some people, I think it is. Yeah, I think it's performative. And I do think from especially big, corporations. And I do think there's also people who's getting to the table, who's making these conversations important. And I think that also was in part due to like social media. If you look at Issa Rae, whose Awkward Black Girl was a YouTube show that like we were waiting for it to launch on YouTube. That's how much we loved it. And now she's on HBO and she's creating more opportunities for people. So it's like partly that, but it is also partly this big business.
Yeah. I think you just said an amazing thing, Kelly, though, because you talked about it, that even though that's kind of where it's coming from, I'm so happy that you said that, because I feel like I'm there thinking the same thing. And the thing is even though that might be where it's coming from, if I think about this as women or, whatever group has it, they're going to take that chance at that moment and start bringing more people in, right? And that's so important, because then that's how we do it. That's how actually true diversity is getting in. It's not just tokenism, right? It's okay, we're in that position, so now what can we do to reach it? Yeah. I mean, it's insidious in a way. Yeah. But yeah, so I had to step in and say that.
To answer this question, actually, I'd like to put forward, conversely, in regards to my previous point, actually, I think that America is leading the way in this, again, because you're so good at capitalism. I actually think that you're very good at setting up like Patreons and these kind of things. And a lot of American artists that I follow seem to be supported by these kinds of structures and new models. I just tried to remember the artist that I follow in California who did the Wasteland series, the trans artist, whose name escapes me right now, who went to CalArts. The trans artist did like a web series called like Wasteland. So they have like thousands of followers on Instagram. So there's some like young 20-something, and they are basically financially supported through their Patreon. We don't know how to do that yet in the UK. So we're in like a really weird position that we're half European and half American. So right now we don't get the same kind of funding that Europe gets, but at the same time we're not as clued up as Americans. So we don't quite know how to do this Patreon. So I actually think that you're very good at this. And actually a lot of artists that I follow who are American seem to be very clued up in regards to how to set up this kind of like support system from your fans, I guess. And this is a new model that we're all getting used to. And I do think that when I say young people, I mean anybody under 30. I think like the younger generation are very good at setting up. And I think it's something that we could all learn from. And I do think that the web series as a medium has actually been like mildly revolutionary, actually, in a lot of ways. In terms of, I don't know if you know Martha Williams, who did Run for Your Life. It was an American web series. She's based in New York, and it was all about shit dates that she went on, but it was hilarious. I mean, like she's really taken off on the back of that, and also, you know, like Broad City. like the two girls based in New York. I mean, obviously that got picked up by Comedy Central in the end. So I do think to a certain extent, actually, American culture is leading the way in regards to this new model of more kind of like independent sourcing of funds.
I think that's a really interesting point that you bring up as kind of an alternative option. But I do wonder with the Patreon system, if it isn't putting the burden of financing art on fans, on, you know, kind of, you know, I understand that as a you know, it brings people together. It's very much creating a community. But I wish, you know, our governments or our, you know, large corporations would give more money to artists rather than the fans having to support them, because that just puts another layer of labor on you as the artist and also on the fans. So I wonder, I mean, again, I'm speaking here from the point of view of a scholar and of a fan, not as an artist, but I wonder if that isn't, you know, maybe a temporary solution, but I wonder if long-term, if that's going to be sustainable for artists to have to really, I don't know. I mean,
when you brought up, initially, Sophie, when you brought up, you know, support, and then Kate, you were thinking along the lines of, I was thinking is, what does crowdsourcing do? But I actually disagree with you. And I wanted to pose the question to all of you is how, if any, you know, if any of you have done any crowdfunding for your films, how has that gone over? And just to sort of, I think Sophie's point is my question or concern of, one, there's the pressure on the consumer again, and the consumer is directly demanding something. But also, you know, I think I don't remember the name of the Wasteland animator either, Kate, and I've been scratching my head. But that also falls into the point of building.
Johnny Phillips.
Yeah, building backing, right? Building support. And then outside of even just the consumer, what does that do to the filmmaker? And how flexible, because we are all, I think, you know, multifaceted, very talented individuals, but there's only so much that we can all do. And especially without things like an agent or support that larger corporations, larger studios have, and the legwork that gets things further. And I'm not saying that as a complaint for myself in my position or anything like that, but when you're talking about what narratives are getting out there, you know, it is very much what one is in demand or quote unquote trend. And sure, I think part of it is that push of the voice, but that can also shift when it's not economically viable. And I'm saying what Kelly said, so I don't want, but it's the same. I really feel that way. So I think that
Ellie has some background in that because it spun off, your work spun off into some good solid freelance work, right? Yeah,
I mean, that coming out of college and starting freelancing, I think the best support I've had is actually Panimation, the women and non-binary and trans group has been a great source of support and been the way that I found most of my work, because similar groups that are more male dominated make it really hard for women and gender nonconforming people to break in. But to touch on crowdfunding, I think the issue with it, I mean, we have in the US sort of evolved to be really good at marketing ourselves and commodifying ourselves because we don't have those institutional supports. But the problem is that that is an enormous amount of labor. And also, you know, when it comes to crowdfunding, it kind of exacerbates inequalities because your network becomes your source of funding, and people who come from more privileged backgrounds are going to have more family members and friends and community that can financially support them. So yeah, I don't know, that's the issue of being an animator under capitalism.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think you articulated kind of what my concern is as someone kind of seeing this happen from the outside, that just that it is sort of increasing these inequities and these, lack of access and all of that. Yeah. Well, I did actually want to bring on, while we're on the topic of the internet and social media, Kelli, your work speaks a lot to this and sort of parodies, kind of social media as a way of life. Or I was wondering if you could speak a bit more to that as a theme in your work, and also maybe to how you see humor in your work. And I know Kate as well, I know that you use a lot of humor in your work, and Ellie, I think each of you maybe have interesting things to say about humor in animation, whether you're subverting it or you're using it to tell your stories.
So this is true. I've been making work about social media since pretty much I started making it work. I feel like I always say I grew up with social media because I feel like I really, like when MySpace came out, I was like the age group that moved through MySpace, then it moved to Facebook, then it moved to Instagram. I feel like it's like I'm growing up with it. I saw the beginnings. So every time I think that I'm done talking about social media, I do a new project and I realized it took me back to social media somehow. So for This Is True, the idea came about during the presidential elections with Trump and Hillary Clinton. And, I always was around, some art crowds where it's like, I'm not even into social media. Like, I don't even do all that. And I'm like, it dawned on me that at this moment, it didn't matter if you had a social media account. Social media affected, your life. Like the president, or now not the president, but he could tweet things that really had effect on the world, and it didn't matter if you had a Facebook account. And I felt like we was living in this hybrid world with regular world and social media, and even important conversations about LGBTQ, and Black Lives Matter. All these things are being, I think, pushed through social media. So social media, and then there was laws created based off of these things that was happening in these conversations happening in social media. So I felt like we live in this hybrid society. So I've made This Is True, where they lived in a physical hybrid society. And I think humor is really interesting because nobody says like, hey, I want to talk about racism. Like, watch this show, this movie about racism. Usually people are like, yeah, I want to watch that. But I think humor makes it accessible in a way that people don't realize that they're acknowledging. Like when you laugh in humor, like that means you understood the joke, meaning you understood where that joke came from. And so I think that, and it makes it just more accessible to talk about really hard subjects. And I think about people like Key and Peele, and I think about Dave Chappelle, who make these really, really, really important conversations that they start in their sketch comedy. Even Amy Schumer, I could say, even Portlandia, the kind of conversations that they're having about this place. These are all my inspirations for This Is True. And so I created that space to just have several conversations. And I thought that social media was also, you could watch literally a video about a person being killed by the police, and then a cat video. And then, it was like your brain is like going through all these things. So I thought it was really interesting. Like when I think about sketch comedy and like short form comedy, I just thought it was a perfect like series to capture all of those things. And so I could talk about anything. It felt like it gave me freedom to talk about, one episode's about technology and, a really embarrassing situation with your family. And then one's about, cultural appropriation, which was really a hot topic on social media at the time. So that was kind of the background to This Is True. And then all the characters are inspired by the people that I encounter in social media. So they're like caricatures of these people. Yeah, so that was my background. And what was the second part of that question?
Well,
I
that's
think
a lot like Kate's work too. I mean,
Yeah.
Pussy Willow is exactly in that genre, in that space.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to echo what Kelly said, and I think I couldn't have articulated that more perfectly, actually, Kelly, in regards to if somebody is laughing along with what you're presenting, on a certain level, they are acknowledging or noting or understanding the point that you're putting forward. And I also work with humor as more a kind of like awareness raising device, but also I try and use it as a way to reveal uncomfortable truths, I guess. So I use humor as a way to reveal uncomfortable truths. So for example, the Pussy Willow episode, Smile, again, sorry to bore you with this again, Howard, because I know we talked about this before. So with this, there is an episode where a woman is being catcalled, but as the episode progresses, the builders actually start to reveal actually very wonderful and insightful things about the woman. So they're not kind of objectifying her. They're revealing quite insightful things. And it's been really interesting when I've watched that with an audience, where the audience is like roaring, like roaring with laughter. And that's made me realize that, like, okay, and like men, just to say, like cishet men, and it just made me realize that, okay, so cishet men do understand about catcalling too, but you are absolutely correct in regards to, if we were to show a serious video about catcalling or about misogyny or about street harassment, nobody would give a shit, you know, like nobody would give a shit. But if we present it in a humorous manner that people can relate to, I think it does make these themes more accessible and like much more powerful as well.
Well, this is why this package that we put together is so powerful, I think, because that's really what we're getting at. You know, each one of you have that voice that's been amplified through the medium of animation.
And I think, you know, there are videos in the package that aren't all humor in sort of the straightforward way. But I think that there are other techniques that those of you who aren't using humor use to kind of disarm or to make some of these challenging topics more palatable, to go back to the idea of food. Like Camila, disarm, yeah. I mean, Camila, I know in your work, for example, I think that actually hearing the voices of these women, I'm assuming it's the real voices, maybe it is, yeah. And the formal choices that you have a different visual style for each story. And I find that although, you know, the stories that you're telling may not be using humor in the same way necessarily, that you've incorporated other techniques to kind of the same effect, I think. Would you like to speak a bit about that? And Ellie, you too. And yeah. I actually find Ellie's film to be quite funny, even though it is a very serious topic. And I think there are moments of humor as well. Yeah, so I don't know if either of you would like to speak to that.
Yeah, I think, for example, in Carne, we had a lot of interviews, like we had like 6 hours of interviews, and almost 1.5 hours for each character. And as we were saying, it's their real voices. We did like a very relaxed conversation with them, but it was very difficult to edit this material, and the film was supposed to be 7 minutes in the right beginning, and then it ends up with 12 minutes. But we also were worried about the tone of the film. It was going to be too
heavy.
Yeah, too heavy. Yeah. And Samuel Mariani, who's also my partner, he's the editor of the film, and we were always discussing how we should edit it, and how I don't know, to put different tones together, not to get this hard level. And also there is a character who she's the fourth one. She's talking about menopause, and she talks in a very light way about it, and also with humor. And she's laughing a lot. And for example, she talks about the doctor who wants to remove her uterus, and she says, "Why doesn't he remove his balls?" Something like that. And it was so important to have her in the film. We actually interviewed 2 women for this chapter, but she was there because of this, because of the lightness of her speech. It was really nice.
Yeah. Excellent.
Well, Ellie and I were talking last night about the light bulb moment that goes off with our students, because we show these films to our students, both Sophie and I, and especially with Ellie and Camila's film, that the young men in the audience, you know, in the classes, when they hear these things, these subjects that are so taboo, right? Young men don't know about menopause, right? And so, and they don't really accept or understand what it takes, you know, in your film to prepare your body and to recycle all over again, you know, every time. And to see those young men, that moment where they kind of go, huh, okay, I just learned something I've never thought about before, and that really changes my perspective on how I think about women and what they have to go through. And I you know, I'm not saying that happens with all of the men in the audience, but it has been, and Sophie's had the same experience too.
Yeah.
And the women who come to us, you know, and say, thank you for creating a safe space in which we can hear our voices in this way. I never imagined that we would be able to hear our voices in that way, let alone its animation. And,
Yeah.
you know, for us as teachers, I think that is really a special moment, right? To see that happen. And it makes me feel like there's hope.
It's
you know?
really powerful. Yeah, if I could jump in on that. And actually we were talking with Ellie about this last night over a beer. And so I've shown the films that are in this package to my students for a couple of semesters. And each time multiple women, 4 or 5 women come up to me separately after class or send me an email and are saying, you know, I've never felt so seen or so represented. And not all of these are actual animation students. Some of, you know, because my classes, my dad teaches animation, my classes are mixed. But you know, there are young women who are studying animation who are like, I thought this was a totally male dominated space, you know, and learning about these fierce artists who are doing the kind of work I want to do and who are telling the kind of stories that I want to tell is very validating for them. And so, I suppose there's not too much of a question there, but kind of on behalf of these students, you know, I wanted to say thank you to each of you for making this kind of work. And actually, you know what, I do have a question in that. I'm curious, you know, because again, these students are so moved to see, you know, women like themselves or stories like their stories on screen. And I was wondering if, you know, when you were growing up or when you were, you know, a young artist, I mean, all of you are still young artists, but did you see yourself represented on screen? Did you have mentors or role models whose work you looked up to, or did you feel like you kind of had to create this space yourself? That's a good question.
I raised my hand. I figured I would try something new because I'm sure everybody has a story, and I really hope that, you know, we can go around and I can hear it, because I really want to hear it from each of the panel. This might sound silly, but when it comes to, you know, animation, right? And whether it's role models or you know, seeing representation, I actually came to animation much the same way I think a lot of you did, which is you saw a place where you can do so many things. I think Kelly, you mentioned you loved architecture and stage design and all these things, and for me it was dance and music. And I used to take out an old VHS camera, you know, that was like here that my parents had. And I would like direct my cousins and I would tell them, you know, you're going to do this and you're Sleeping Beauty and you're dead and whatnot. So like, in terms of seeing it, it was the animation itself that I saw, but it wasn't until that I actually saw, again, silly enough, Kiki's Delivery Service. Because I was so inundated with Disney and Don Bluth and that kind of animation. And I actually also watched like old Flip the Frog, Fleischer stuff because they had that playing on my PBS, which is amazing.
Yeah.
They don't know why they did that locally, but thank you, local PBS channel. But it wasn't until I saw that I connected with just a regular kid, a regular little girl, even though she was magical. Like, Kiki's like a little witch, but she's fallible. And that for me made me both connect that one, animation was something I could do and make and use stories that connected to me, and also felt like seen as a small human. And so in that way, you know, yes, but when it came to who was my mentor, when I was looking into animation, it was, you know, Hayao Miyazaki or Glenn Keane or Masaki Yuasa, really amazing animators that are, again, you know, at the time I was consuming a lot more feature length things, but male. And so I, like you, in my classes, I find it very important to sit and go and look for other voices. You know, I've had kids in my class, trans kids in my class, that have been like, thank you so much for bringing to my attention that this person even exists. And I think it's important because they have existed and they've been there. They've just either been hidden for safety reasons or hidden and written over in history. And that goes across many, many types of people. So I'm gonna let somebody else tell me about themselves. I want to hear it.
Well, I would say when I was younger, the Proud Family was like, I loved that show.
It's so exciting. It's back.
Yeah, the Proud Family was definitely like that. Definitely was like, I felt like I could see myself and my family on TV. A different world, and that's not animation, that's live action. I feel like I still like live action would really inspire me. That's one reason why I wanted to go to a historically Black college, because I saw a different world and it was an amazing show. But with storytelling and like really me wanting to do, like, This Is True was created to be a web series. I would say it was Issa Rae with her Awkward Black Girl series that used to premiere on YouTube. That's when I was like, oh, I could just do this. And even if 5 people see it, I could do it. And now she's on HBO and she's doing all this stuff. And that really just showed. And then Broad City, I found out Broad City actually was on YouTube first after I was watching them on Comedy Central. And I was like, wow, YouTube is such an amazing platform that I can actually watch these, you know, like, people are really getting out there. They're getting a fan base just by making good work and putting it out. And, you know, also doing self-promotion, because that's a part of it, which I have not mastered yet. But yeah, that's, I would say, some of the people that really made me feel like I can actually do what I want to do in the career. Because I never really felt like I wanted to go to an animation studio. I never really knew where my career would lead me, because that was never really my desire. And those made it feel like, now I started to see a career through how they produced work.
So I actually didn't really have a lot of inspiration when I was growing up in regards to seeing myself represented. So the person that made me want to do animation, the director that really inspired me was Michel Gandre, who is a French director who was doing a lot of music videos in the 90s, which is when I was a teenager. And a lot of his stuff was just so magic realism. It was just like wonderful. So he worked with Bjork, he worked with the White Stripes. So that was the director that really made me want to be a filmmaker. So to be honest, there weren't a lot of female animation directors. There were no, as I knew of, queer directors. So I didn't really have that inspiration. So yeah, so my main inspiration in terms of animation was a cishet, like male white director. But in regards to writing, and I know this is probably like more of a kind of like UK reference, my inspiration was a comedian called Caroline Aherne, who was a Manchester-based comedian, and she was a writer and performer on a sketch comedy TV show called The Fast Show. There was also a sketch comedy TV show called Smack the Pony, which was the only female comedian directed show that there was on broadcast at that time. So I was quite inspired by a lot of female comedians. But in terms of animation, I don't know, it took me years. I must say, actually, going to actual animation festivals is actually where I first saw a lot of female animation directors. And that's when I learned about Eastern European animation, which is like a massive influence. But I was quite kind of like late to the game in that regard. But I think as a young person, I was a teenager in the 90s, so we didn't have the internet then. So I don't think, I don't think that I had a lot of access to female role models or essentially female queer role models in any way.
Yeah.
David Bowie.
Yeah, you all are the role models now.
Thank you. Actually, when I was in Kosovo, I went to Anibar in Kosovo, and I was mildly enamored to discover that a lot of young people there appeared to perceive me as a queer icon. So I felt quite touched, actually.
That's awesome.
Modern queer heroes.
That makes me happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can connect with Kate's what she said. I think it was similar to me. I think it was when I was a teenager, I was more interested in filmmaking, more like live action and things like this. I also like handmade things and like painting, drawing, but not as a profession. But afterwards, being in contact with animation festivals and independent animations, and even tutors like Lizzie Hobbs and Wilson Lazzaretti, which is from Brazil, I think they opened my mind to things I was more interested, and I couldn't find it on the mainstream, and I think it really made a difference. I remember watching a animated documentary in Anima Mundi, which is an animation festival in Brazil, and they were screening Animateca's screening. It was another festival, and I was really struck with a film made by a woman filmmaker. It was really nice, and it changed my mind.
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, I feel like growing up, there was so much representation of people like me on TV in a way. Like, there was no dearth of suburban white girls on TV. But I think I don't know, the representations weren't coming from women until pretty recently. And it wasn't until like The Girls and the Fleabag and those kind of shows and like Broad City that I really felt represented, I guess. And the shows that I watched growing up more were the ones that were teaching me that like I needed to change myself to fit into a certain model and to do all these things to my body to feel normal and feminine. And so yeah, I guess it came later, and I think we still have a long way to go.
Yeah, a long way to go, but it is comforting to know that this kind of fantastic work is being done, and that we do have a new generation of young artists, aspiring animators and filmmakers who get to watch all of your work and get to have these fantastic role models and models for powerful and empowering work to look up to. So I think we're gonna end it here, but thank you so much to each of you for being so generous with your time. And I really, really enjoyed hearing what you all had to say. And I hope we can all have more conversations in the future. And yeah, I don't know if, Dad, did you?
No, I'm just pleased that everybody was able to show up. Sorry for some of the technical difficulties, and you know, that's the Zoom world we live in. So
yeah. Someday we'll all be together in person.
Yeah. and we'll be reaching out to you for other things in the future, I think.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.